I'm Curt Dupriez, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the 2025 Subaru WRX all-wheel drive TS Spec B. Now that doesn't exactly roll off the tongue like, say, STI, and there's a good reason for that. It's not a real STI, despite what some of the badges around the car might otherwise suggest. Subaru takes the provenance of STI, or Subaru Technica International, its motorsport division, very seriously. And there is a fine tradition of STI being reserved for WRXs that really do have rally-bred DNA, such as engines, transmissions, and differentials. Subaru's involvement in rallying has waned over the last few years, so it's wisely but sadly parked dedicated STIs from its lineup, which leaves us with a breed of softer, tuned by STI, hence TS, models such as this one. In essence, the TS stuff is a regular model that has go fast, or at least looks like a go fast, modifications. And you'll find it on various Subaru models such as the Forester, the XV, and the BRZ. So they're not quite as exotic in the details or as heroic in the complete package. But of the current 9-strong WRX lineup, there's only one Spec B, and it gets the fanciest and tastiest of the upgrades and looks like it's the quickest, even though technically it's not. And clearly the Spec B is the closest WRX to the famed STI breed, and one tailored specifically to the gearheads. But is it hot? And is it fun? And does this version come anywhere near to rubbing shoulders to a genuine STI experience in its heyday? Let's find out. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
Budget Direct.
So what defines a TS Spec B? Well, currently this sedan is the only version that you can get with a manual transmission and adaptive suspension. And to this point, the only manual available is in sedan form, and the only adaptive suspension is available on any variant with TS. It's a single want-for-nothing spec, Spec B, that lists for $61,490. However, it's not the most expensive WRX in the lineup. It's based on the mid-spec WRX RS manual sedan, but it's $8,000 cheaper. And it loads in a whole load of goodies that does hope to justify that $8,000 splurge. So the electronically adaptive suspension is paired with Drive Mode Select, which is exclusive to the TS models. And there are 4 different preset modes from Comfort to Sport Plus, where you can adjust things like engine, suspension, and steering. Plus there's also an individual mode where you can tailor fit the settings to your liking. One of the most obvious big ticket items on the outside are these satin grey 19-inch rims that are shod with Bridgestone Potenza S007 tyres. All other WRXs get 18s. Another Spec B exclusive is the Brembo brakes, which are 6-pot up front, 2-pot in the rear, and they come so close to the rim that you could barely put a 10-cent coin in there. But while the rolling stock looks fantastic, that's more than can be said for this plastic cladding that looks like it was stolen from Uncle Len's Outback. Just why Subaru designers are compelled to put SUV cladding on all their WRXs is a bit of a head-scratcher. Speaking of aesthetic missteps, there's this massive rear wing that looks like it's come screaming out of the rally of somewhere circa 2005. I'm sure it will grab the attention from the local highway patrol, and it is functional in that you could probably put your wet laundry on there in order for it to dry. There's also a no-cost optional STI Performance exhaust, but if you've already signed up for the big wing, it's really a case of in for a penny, in for a pound. Right, let's see what this car's got on offer on the inside. This is a likeable cabin, but to be frank, climbing into the 2025 WRX does feel like you're sort of climbing into yesteryear. Some of that is the fitment of these Recaro seats, which was a bit of a flex for go-faster Japanese cars back in the noughties. When this car launched back in March, you could only get these Recaros in the Spec B. However, MY25 upgrades to the rest of the range means that all the TS variants now get these same seats. They're 8-way electric on the driver's side and 4-way mechanical on the passenger side, and they're really heavily bolstered, so they weld your body nicely into place, and not politely either. The tight fit might make them really good for a few hot laps at a racetrack, but they're not that great for long-haul comfort. These seats do seem like they've just been plucked out of a Recaro catalogue and plonked into the car, and they're not great in some areas. For a start, the seat base is very short and there's not a lot of under-thigh support, and the seat backs are very flat and almost ironing board-like, so they don't really fill the arch in your back. But there are some exclusive Spec B details still in here, such as the nice suede-like material across the dash and the door trims, this sort of carbon fibre material, and some neat double red stitching. So it's all fairly racy in here, except perhaps the steering wheel, which does look like it also was lifted from Uncle Len's Outback. It's your typical 17-button Subaru steering wheel despite the STI badge at the bottom, and I really do think they could have put a more purposeful tiller in this car. When it launched in March this year, the Spec B did debut this 12.3-inch LCD digital driver screen, but that too has migrated to some of the other variants in the MY25 lineup. The digital screen does drag WRX kicking and screaming into about 2017 because it does have an old school look, but it is bright and very clear. But it certainly looks a lot fresher than the rest of the dash fascia, including this portrait-style media screen, which looks a little bit more like 2013. In fine Subaru tradition, it's an overabundance of information, an absolute mess of different fonts, but the audio dials and the HVAC buttons do make it really simple to adjust some of those basic functions. There's some basic dials for audio and some switch gear for the climate control, which is really good, making some basic adjustment nice and easy. There's no inductive phone charging and no sunroof, but it does really feel fit for battle. It even has an old school mechanical handbrake, which will be particularly useful if you're hitting the skid pan or a dirt motorcana. Right, let's check out Road 2. Many owners won't be getting into the Spec B experience as a family car, but it's good to know that it can do it if that suits your lifestyle. Size-wise, there's plenty of knee room here near here, and the backseat contour is actually pretty comfortable, but the big compromise is in headroom. Again, there's no sunroof in Spec B. Subaru reckons that it's to reduce weight to improve performance, but also it doesn't really have the concave cutout in here like it does up front. But like up front, you do get flocked door bins, so your drinks don't go rattling around while the car's moving. And you also get seat heating in the back and dual USB ports. However, there are no air vents in here, and that is a real downmark when it comes to family friendliness. It's a real shame then that Subaru doesn't do a 5-door Spec B. Now they do a TS Sport wagon, so you do get the adaptive suspension and the same amount of power. However, they're only available with a rubbish automatic CVT transmission. And for my money, a real Rex needs to be manual. So rather than the 492 litres that you do get in the wagon, you only get 411 in the sedan. That is, if you want to swap cogs yourself. You also lose the handy split-fold load-through of the wagon that liberates 1,430 litres as a 2-seater. But regardless of what body style that you choose, either way gets a space-saver spare under the floor. Right, no more boring stuff, let's hit the road. Hit the road, and instantly what's most impressive about the Spec B or any of the current WRX manual sedans at the moment is just how drivable they are. And here's why. I've reviewed countless WRXs over the years since the 90s, and for my money it really hit its stride with the Bug-Eye STI of 2001, and it's slowly gone downhill for a couple of decades since then. The WRXs and STIs started to feel a little bloated and disconnected, and a lot of their go-fast bits felt like they were bolted on rather than really integrated and calibrated. But this Spec B in this generation of WRX feels surprisingly honed and polished. It's a real return to form, and not just when you're stringing it out, but also when you dial it back and driving around town. In terms of outputs, the 202 kilowatts and 350 newton meters of this 2.4 litre boxer outstrips that of the Bug-Eye STI's 2 litre from back in 2001. And at 1.5 tonnes for this car, which isn't that heavy, the power to weight is pretty similar as well. But unlike some boxers of old, this engine really has some natural inertia at idle, so it's not constantly trying to stall on you off the mark. There's also plenty of torque on tap as it ramps up to torque peak at 2000 RPM, so it gets out of the hole really well if you give it the berries. When you do launch it and dump the clutch, it doesn't bog down, but nor does it feel like it's trying to spit gears through the side of the gearbox. The clutch feels strong and it's nicely progressive in its bite, so it's quite a joy to use when you're rowing through the 6-speed. And the box itself does remind me of some of the older STI designs in that the throw is quite short, the gates are fairly tight, and you can rush through it without it balking in the heat of the battle. The ratios also feel tightly stacked, although a lot of that must be the 4.4:1 final drive ratio that really makes this car feel punchy on the move. So it's removed some of that elastic sensation that you used to get in some of the old WRXs, where the engine took its time to get up into its torque peak. So there's a real synergy to the controls, and that does extend through to the steering, which is also nice and fluid, but it's a little bit heavy in sport mode, and I much prefer it when you put it in comfort. And the front end geometry is dialed in such a way that you really get a nice, clean and linear response. These Bridgestone Potenzas are really grippy, at least when you're in the dry. And of course, you get that all-port traction. However, this all-wheel drive system, which uses a viscous center differential, is nowhere near as tricky and purposeful as some of the hardware fitted to STIs of the past. But it does assert itself well in full grip situations, giving the car a very neutral character. But it is more sure-footed than it is playful, at least when it comes to doling out the torque to individual axles or individual wheels. But break through the grip and there's none of those STI tricks like power oversteer out of the corner with nothing more than welding the right foot into the firewall. But this thing can really boogie, and it is a hell of a hoot when you really properly uncork it. And when you do so point to point across a back road, or in this case our test track, it really does feel by the seat of the pants as quick as some of those old STI stock, even if it's not quite as playful and engaging. And a lot of that has to do with the Brembos. Now, Subaru's history with Brembo hardware has been a little bit patchy in the past, but this spec of Brembo on this car feels strong, powerful, and progressive. But perhaps the biggest surprise of the Spec B experience is the ride quality. Now, I get to drive a lot of family-friendly mid-size SUVs in this chasing cars gig, but I must say, when set to comfort, this WRX rides better than most of them. The adaptive dampers have 3 different settings in comfort, normal, and sport, and they're paired in different settings to 4 different drive modes. It's easy to adjust on the fly, and you can assign whatever setting you like to individual drive mode. But no matter what setting you choose, the damping remains compliant and well judged. The adaptive damping is only available on the Spec B or the TS versions of the WRX lineup, but once you've sampled it, it'd be really hard to pass up. However, there are some running costs that I do wish that you could skip. Downsides? Well, it is thirsty. The regular manual WRX sedan is 9.9 litres per 100 combined and 13.8 litres for urban. But for reasons that aren't entirely clear, the Spec B is half a litre thirstier on both of those counts, and it needs 95 octane premium fuel. Running costs? Well, if you drive the WRX Spec B as nature intended, you will be going through a lot of fuel and tyres and eventually brake pads, and that will burn a fairly big hole in the hip pocket. But if you want to have fun, that's the price of doing business. Servicing for 5 years is just under $2,700, and servicing intervals are 12 months or 15,000 kilometres, which is fairly typical. And there's 5 years of unlimited kilometre warranty, provided you don't race, rally, hill climb or speed trial your WRX. You have been warned. Is the TS Spec B a real STI by another name? No, it's not. But does it come tantalisingly close to offering similar fun factor and pace? Most certainly does. So while it is hot and it is fun, it doesn't really have that grab-it, scruff talent of true STI machinery. But judge it for what it is, and it does bottle enough of the good stuff to live up to the expectations many buyers will have. It's certainly the most complete variant in the WRX lineup and is arguably its best all-rounder. But don't forget that you can get all of the same pace and most of the same gear in the regular manual WRX sedan that is around 14 grand more affordable, which really makes the base version look like one hell of a bargain. And of course, Subaru could hopefully eventually pull its finger out and offer more powerful engines, helical front and rear differentials, a driver adjustable center differential, and end up with a proper STI that the world probably deserves right now. So here's hoping. That's what I think, but how about you? Put your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.